The host wanted to turn Stallone into an example, but instead, he became the perfect reason why people have lost faith in mainstream media. The studio lights beamed down, too bright, the kind that made people sweat even when they had nothing to be nervous about. But Sylvester Stallone? He wasn't nervous at all. Sitting back in his chair, legs apart, shoulders loose, he just waited. The audience murmured, anticipation thick in the air. Some clutched their phones, already set to record. They knew something was about to go down. Across from him sat Ethan Caldwell, a sharp-dressed, polished TV host, well known for his progressive slant and his love for those gotcha moments. Leaning forward, a smug grin creeping onto his face, he was ready. Ethan had grilled politicians, activists, and Hollywood elites, always managing to get them to stumble. But Stallone, that was new territory. "Mr. Stallone," Ethan began, his voice smooth, practiced. "You've always represented American toughness, but don't you think that kind of masculinity is outdated? I mean, in today's world, shouldn't we redefine strength to be more inclusive?" A few audience members chuckled, some nodding along. Ethan's fans, the ones who loved seeing him trap his guests in their own words. Stallone blinked, slow and deliberate. Then, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees, he exhaled through his nose. "You're asking if I think being tough is a bad thing now?" Ethan smirked. "Well, don't you think we've moved past the time where men needed to punch their way through problems? Isn't that kind of thinking outdated?" Silence. The kind that stretches just long enough to make people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Stallone scratched his chin, then let out a laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a deep, real belly laugh. "You're serious," he finally said. "You actually think toughness is a problem?" Ethan straightened his tie. "I think it can be toxic when it discourages vulnerability. Yes." Stallone nodded slowly, like he was turning it over in his head. Then he leaned back, arms stretching across the chair's back. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice steady, deliberate. "If someone broke into your house tonight, would you want a tough guy in there? Or would you rather have someone sit down and talk about their feelings?" Gasps rippled through the audience. A few claps, scattered but loud. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Stallone wasn't finished. "See, toughness isn't about punching walls or yelling the loudest," he continued. "It's about standing your ground when life knocks you down. It's about protecting your family. It's about discipline, respect, hard work. And if you really think the world doesn't need that anymore—" He shook his head. "Then man, I don't know what world you're living in." Ethan forced a chuckle. But there was a flicker, just a flicker, of something behind his eyes. Hesitation. He hadn't expected Stallone to fire back so quickly, but he wasn't backing down that easily. "All right," Ethan said, shifting in his seat. "But don't you think Hollywood, and let's be honest, your own movies, have glorified violence as the only solution to problems?" Stallone didn't even pause. "Hollywood glorifies a lot of things. You ever seen a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork? Laughter. This time, real laughter. Even a few of Ethan's crew members smirked. But Ethan, he wasn't done. He had more tricks up his sleeve. But Stallone, he was just getting started. Ethan straightened his posture, shuffling through the stack of cue cards on his lap like he was searching for the perfect counterpunch. He was good at this, controlling the tempo, leading his guests down a path where they had no choice but to stumble. But Stallone, he wasn't playing that game. "All right, let's talk about influence," Ethan said, flipping through his notes. "You've built your career playing tough, no-nonsense characters, guys who solve problems with their fists, guns, or just brute force. Do you ever think about the message that sends? I mean, don't you feel a responsibility to promote, let's say, a more progressive kind of hero? The way he stretched out progressive just enough to let the audience know where this was headed made Stallone smirk. He sat up, rolling his shoulders, like a boxer getting ready for the next round. First of all, Stallone said, his voice steady, I make movies. Movies ain't real. You know that, right? He raised an eyebrow. Last time I checked, I never actually went 15 rounds with Apollo Creed, never took down an entire army with just a red bandana and a knife, never ran up those steps in Philly and magically fixed people's problems. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. But Ethan, he wasn't letting go. Sure, Ethan pressed, but movies shape culture. Kids grew up watching Rambo and Rocky. Don't you think we should be giving them heroes who solve problems without violence? Stallone exhaled through his nose. Man, you ever seen Rocky? He shook his head. That whole movie wasn't about beating people up. It was about getting back up when life knocks you down. It was about heart, perseverance. And Rambo? He shrugged. That guy just wanted to be left alone. If people had just let him walk through town and mind his business, none of that would have happened. This time the audience clapped, a little louder, a little longer. Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew this wasn't going the way he'd planned. So he leaned in, voice softer, trying to make it personal. Okay, fair enough, he said. But let's talk about the real world. Let's talk about America, right now. We're at a point where people are questioning what it means to be a man, what it means to be tough. And some might say that your version of toughness, the old school, never show weakness kind, is part of the problem, that it creates more division than unity. What do you say to that? Stallone let the question hang in the air. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, his eyes locked onto Ethan. You ever met a firefighter? He asked. Ethan blinked. Excuse me, a firefighter, a cop, a guy in the military. Hell, even a single mom working 2 jobs just to put food on the table. You ever talked to those people? You think toughness is their problem? Stallone shook his head. No, man. Their toughness is what keeps the world running. The problem ain't toughness. It's people acting like strength is something bad, like it's dangerous. Weakness ain't a virtue, pal. Strength with control. That's what keeps people safe. Somewhere in the back, someone let out a low whistle. The energy in the room had shifted. Ethan was losing his grip. But what about? Stallone lifted a hand, not aggressively, just enough to make it clear he wasn't done. You want to know the real problem? Stallone leaned forward. It's not toughness. It's people talking about toughness like it's the enemy, while living in a world built and protected by tough people. His gaze locked onto Ethan. You sit here in your nice suit, with your scripted questions, trying to tell me what's outdated? Let me tell you something, man. If the world ever really goes sideways, if things get bad, you're going to be real glad there's still guys like me around. Dead. Silence. Ethan swallowed. He had another question lined up, another attempt to wrestle back control, but the audience had shifted. They weren't nodding with him anymore. They were waiting for Stallone's next words. And Stallone, he wasn't letting up any time soon. Ethan adjusted in his seat, feeling the energy in the room slipping through his fingers. He knew it. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to. Stallone wasn't fumbling, wasn't tripping over his words, wasn't getting defensive. No, he was owning the room. And now, the audience wasn't just listening, they were rooting for him. Ethan forced a smile, trying to pull the conversation back into his control. "I hear you, I do," he said, voice measured. "But let's be real. There's a difference between being strong and refusing to change. A lot of people would say that your way of thinking, this old-school mindset, is exactly what's holding society back. Don't you think it's time to move forward?" Stallone exhaled slowly, his gaze steady. He could have thrown back another joke, another sharp one-liner. But instead, his tone shifted, calm, almost reflective. "You ever seen a building being torn down?" he asked. Ethan blinked. "What? A demolition? You ever watch one?" The host hesitated. "I mean, yeah, I suppose." Stallone nodded. "Takes what? A few seconds to bring it down. A couple charges, a button press, and boom, it's gone." He clasped his hands together. "But you ever see one being built?" Ethan didn't answer. "That takes years," Stallone continued. "Brick by brick. Steel by steel. Men working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it holds." He leaned forward. "Now, the people holding the detonators? They don't care about that. They don't think about the work, the sweat, the people who risk their lives to build it. They just want to see it come crashing down." The audience was locked in. Nobody moved. "You say we need to move forward," Stallone said. "But move where? Forward ain't always the right direction. Sometimes people get so caught up in change they don't even stop to ask what they're tearing down, or if it was worth keeping." Ethan licked his lips. He could feel it. This moment was slipping away. He'd gone into this interview expecting an easy target, a celebrity who'd crack under pressure, a man who could be reduced to a caricature. But Stallone, he was proving him wrong. And worse, the audience knew it. "All right," Ethan said, forcing a chuckle. "That's an interesting perspective. But let's be real. Society has changed. We don't live in the same world we did when you made Rocky. People are more aware now. We're thinking critically about gender roles, systemic issues." "Thinking critically?" Stallone cut in, raising an eyebrow. "Or just criticizing?" The crowd erupted. Some clapped, some gasped, and even Ethan's own camera crew exchanged glances. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a battle. Ethan held up his hands, trying to settle the room. Okay, he said over the noise. "So let me ask you this. If toughness is so important, why do you think so many people push back against it? Why do so many people feel like it's outdated?" Stallone let the question hang in the air, just for a moment. Then he leaned in, voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "Because weak people don't like being reminded they're weak." The crowd exploded. Some jumped to their feet, clapping. Others just sat there, stunned. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Stallone let the reaction ride out before finally sitting back. "Look," he said, voice steady, "I ain't saying everybody needs to be some action hero. I'm saying life's gonna hit you, whether you like it or not. And when it does, the world ain't gonna care about your feelings. It's gonna ask you one question. Can you take the hit and keep moving forward?" Ethan had nothing. No quip. No comeback. Just silence. But outside of that studio, something even bigger was happening, because the second that moment hit the internet, everything changed. The moment the interview ended, Ethan barely held his professional smile as the cameras cut. But Stallone... He just stood up, stretched his shoulders, and gave the audience a small wave before walking off the set, like nothing had happened. Backstage, total chaos. Producers scrambled. Ethan's earpiece buzzed with frantic voices. That did not go as planned. Social media is already picking it up. Cut the controversial parts before we post it online. But it was too late. Someone in the live audience had already uploaded clips, and within minutes, the internet was on fire. Stallone body slams TV host. Sylvester Stallone destroys woke media in live debate. This is why we still need real men like Stallone. The video spread like wildfire, jumping from Twitter to Facebook to YouTube. People clipped the best moments, overlaying reaction memes, slow-motion replays, even dramatic background music. Within hours, the clip was trending #1, and the comments? A battleground. I don't even like Stallone's movies, but this? Incredible. He said what everyone has been thinking but was too scared to say. Notice how the host had nothing when Stallone flipped the script? Classic. Of course, backlash followed right behind. Just another aging celebrity stuck in the past. Toxic masculinity at its finest. Can we please stop pretending this guy is some kind of intellectual? Ethan's network scrambled for damage control. They put out a carefully worded statement. We believe differing opinions spark meaningful conversations. Ethan himself rushed to Twitter. Healthy debate is important. I respect Mr. Stallone's views, even if I don't agree. Let's keep the conversation civil. But guess what? No one cared. The internet had already decided who won. Meanwhile, Stallone? Not a single tweet. No press statements. Nothing. He just went about his day, completely unbothered. Because, unlike the people fighting in the comment sections, he had nothing to prove. But as the dust settled, a much bigger question started floating around. Was this just another viral moment? Or had Stallone exposed something deeper about modern media? Days passed, but the clip, it refused to die. It was everywhere. Morning shows, podcasts, news segments, all dissecting what it meant. Some called it a wake-up call. Others dismissed it as just another manufactured controversy. But one thing was clear. People weren't just talking about Stallone. They were talking about something bigger. One side argued, Stallone just exposed modern media's hypocrisy. Hosts like Ethan love pushing an agenda, but the second they get challenged, they fold. They expect celebrities to just nod along. But the moment someone thinks for themselves, they freak out. The other side fired back. Stallone is just another rich actor clinging to outdated ideas. It's easy to preach toughness when you're living in a mansion. But then, something interesting happened. Firefighters, police officers, military vets, factory workers, construction crews, single moms, people who actually knew what toughness looked like in the real world, started speaking up. A viral Facebook post from a retired Marine exploded. Stallone gets it. Strength isn't about being a bully. It's about standing up when life knocks you down. We need more of that. A mother from Oklahoma shared a video. I raised 3 boys on my own. If I hadn't been tough, they wouldn't have eaten. Don't tell me strength is a bad thing. Even a quiet, low-quality clip of an older man at a gas station went viral. He was watching the interview on his phone, shaking his head. These kids don't know what real struggle is. They think life's about debating nonsense on TV. Stallone understands real life. And Ethan? He went silent. His network kept pushing other stories, trying desperately to shift attention. But it didn't work. Every attempt to move on was met with the same question, again and again. Why does a Hollywood actor have more common sense than a professional journalist? And that's when the real conversation began. Not about Stallone, not about the interview, but about the bigger picture. Had modern society really gone soft? Were people so afraid of real strength that they just pretended it wasn't necessary? Was the media actually shaping culture, or just controlling it? These weren't just viral talking points anymore. They became dinner-table conversations. People weren't just watching anymore. They were waking up. And Stallone? He still hadn't said a word. Then, a week later, he finally spoke. Not through a press release. Not on social media. It happened during a casual interview in a small gym in San Diego, California. A local reporter brought up the viral moment, expecting some kind of damage control. Instead, Stallone wiped the sweat from his forehead, took a sip from his water bottle, and just shrugged. "Look, man, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just being honest." The reporter pressed on. "But did you expect the reaction to be this huge?" Stallone chuckled. "I've been around a long time. People always act surprised when someone tells the truth. That's the world we live in now." That simple response, it hit harder than any speech. No grand statement, no victory lap. Just a man who said what he believed and moved on. But the real impact, that was still unfolding. Ethan Caldwell's show, ratings dropped. His network, they quietly shifted him to different segments, away from high-profile interviews. He wasn't cancelled, but he wasn't a rising star anymore either. Meanwhile, something unexpected started happening. People began re-watching Stallone's old interviews, his speeches, even his movies, seeing them in a new light. Clips of Rocky Balboa's famous monologue resurfaced. "It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." People started using it in discussions about grit, resilience, real strength. And outside the online debates, in the real world, something shifted. Young men started showing up at boxing gyms, pushing themselves harder. Parents started talking about teaching their kids discipline instead of entitlement. Workers, they found themselves standing a little taller, pushing through struggles, instead of complaining about them, not because Stallone told them to, but because they saw, firsthand, the difference between real strength and performative weakness. In the end, this was never about one interview. It wasn't about Stallone versus Ethan Caldwell. It was about a world that had forgotten what toughness actually meant, and one man who reminded them. So if you've made it this far, ask yourself, what kind of strength do you value? The kind that folds the moment it's questioned, or the kind that stands firm when it matters most? Because at the end of the day, toughness isn't about muscles. It's about who you are when no one's watching. Like what you heard. Subscribe for more stories that make you think. Because in a world full of noise, the truth still matters.